Yeah. Yeah. Namaste. Today we shall talk about psychoanalysis and mystics as a part of our series on mystics like J. Krishnamurti, Osho, U.G. Krishnamurti. And today we shall talk about Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo was educated in England and he served also as a principal of a college. But soon he left it all to join the Indian freedom movement and became its very revolutionary leader. During this period, he also took to yoga and became a yogi and an intellectual. There is a very interesting quote by him in which he says, yoga is nothing but practical psychology. So today, we shall discuss this very interesting subject with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir. Sir, can we start with what is the scope and depth of Sri Aurobindo's work?
It is both wide and deep. Sri Aurobindo is in the same league in the context of Indian tradition like Vedvyas, Gaudapada, Shankaracharya, Abhinav Gupta. These are those people who have done a wide and deep range of work, cutting across many disciplines. Sri Aurobindo's work is in the areas of spirituality, culture, philosophy, literature, mysticism, and even uh, arts and poetry. Just take a look at some of his works. If we look at the philosophical aspect, we have his famous book, The Life Divine. When we go to spirituality, it is synthesis of yoga. When we go to culture, it is foundations of Indian culture. When we go to yoga, it is record of yoga. When we go to literature, it is uh, the future poetry. When we go to the ancient literature, it is hymns to the mystic fire. And when we go to his masterpiece, uh, Savitri, it is the longest poem in English literature. It was nominated for Nobel Prize, but he withdrew that nomination.
Mhm.
Savitri is also known as fifth Veda by his disciples. It goes into details of his own spiritual journey inside and of the spiritual journey inside of his spiritual collaborator, the mother. Just take one part of Savitri. One part of Savitri is titled The Book of Traveler of the Worlds. And in this part of that whole epic, which is a small part of the epic, he describes the journey of the inner traveler through each of the chakras and through each of the worlds outside. So inside, through each of the chakras, and outside, the physical world that we live in, the astral world, the emotional world, and so on, the worlds outside, which we normally are not aware of.
Right.
And you can see the kind of profundity that we are dealing with. And it is a masterpiece that he kept writing and rewriting, making it more and more perfect over a period of more than a decade, I believe. And like all classical epic writers of antiquity, Sri Aurobindo Savitri also starts from the origin of the universe and goes up to the final purpose of the universe. So it deals with subjects like philosophy, poetry, spirituality, cosmology, and ontology. All these subjects are dealt with in a poetic way. And the most important part is what Sri Aurobindo has said about is related to one, the planes and parts of the being, of the human being, which normally we would call as the model of the mind. He uses the word planes and parts of the being. And the second aspect is his cosmology of how the universe is. And the third aspect is that we are a race in evolution. And just as after monkeys we have come, after us better race will come. We are not the last race on this planet. And therefore, the limits of human beings is not the limits of what can be achieved on earth. The destiny of earth is much better than the destiny of human beings, because post-human also much better races are going to come. This being so, the central idea then comes about is the optimism that all is not lost. Human beings may be trivial, but we are not the last race. So you still have hope. And Sri Aurobindo is among one of those very few people who believe, quite unlike Gautam Buddha, who believes, Sri Aurobindo believes that it is possible to establish a sublime life, what he calls the divine life on this planet. He does not write off uh, the difficulties of human life as being eternal or limits of what can be achieved on this planet. So it's very different from Buddha. For Buddha, this is the place of suffering, and there is no question of not having suffering on earth. The whole question is how to insulate oneself or how to master or overcome this suffering. But there is no question of extinguishing the suffering person. One can be liberated from it, one can master it, one can minimize it, but nobody can extinguish, annihilate completely suffering from this world. In that sense, the Buddhist thought is quite unlike the Veda. The Veda is quite optimistic. It says the goal of human life is to make earth and heaven equal and one. And Sri Aurobindo continues in that tradition. So when we look at the Indian tradition, we have the optimists and the pessimists. Of course, the pessimists will not call themselves pessimists, they will call themselves realists. But whatever they call from a layman's point of view, if you oversimplify and classify, Sri Aurobindo falls in the very optimistic category that it is possible to establish divine life on earth. And he writes a very good line in Savitri when he talks about his uh, Sri Aurobindo ashram and how they were trying to establish as near to a good life as possible there. He writes, it's a very famous line. It says, a camp of God is pitched in human times. So his work is both wide and deep. And I think about when it was done, maybe about 50 years ago or more than that, it was far ahead into the future. And it was so far ahead into the future that even today it is into the future.
From what you have shared, sir, it almost sounds like one can hope for divinity and humanity coming together.
Right.
Uh, and I believe his followers called him an avatar.
That's right. Yes.
And from what you have shared, it seems very convincing that he was called an avatar by his followers.
Yes, because according to them, Savitri is almost like the fifth Veda, and Sri Aurobindo was the first human being to realize the supramental consciousness in himself, in his body, and that was the work of his lifetime. How to bring down the supramental power and the supramental consciousness into his body, and the whole idea there of avatar is that avatar is the first person who starts something new in human civilization. And it is not possible for ordinary human beings to take that first step. And therefore, there is a unique way in which the supreme power sort of creates a special individual to undertake that first step. So, when we look at the theory of Dasha Avatar, every time an avatar comes, he is the first to take the first step, which is the next step in evolution. And then collectively, many people join in. But the first step is taken by somebody very special. And Sri Aurobindo has written a very good essay on this. The essay is titled, it is in his book called The Essays on the Gita. And the essay is titled Vibhuti and the Avatar. So Vibhuti is the extraordinary human being. You can talk of Leonardo da Vinci, you can talk of Einstein, Ved Vyas. These are extraordinary human beings, which it's not possible for an ordinary human being to be like them. Most of them, it's not possible. So these are extraordinary human beings. He calls them Vibhuti, but they are different from an avatar who has an evolutionary role and who takes the first step when evolution has to move from phase 1 to phase 2. So his disciples believe that Sri Aurobindo himself was an avatar, and therefore he was able to uh, bring down the supramental consciousness in his body, and he was beginning of a new race. And therefore, in future, when the time is right, the new supramental race will take place on earth.
Uh, can you now share with us how does psychoanalysis look at his work?
Uh, with complete disbelief. Very unfortunate, but complete disbelief. I wish there was a sense of wonder. Unfortunately, psychoanalysis does not have that positivity and that playfulness to really look at Sri Aurobindo with a sense of wonder. So psychoanalysis looks at him with its classical concepts. So psychoanalysis would say most of his concepts are narcissistic, they are wish fulfillments, they are search of the good breast, they are uh, inability to adapt to reality and face the negative effect of reality. This is how psychoanalysis would look at it. If we look on 5 points, let us say, to answer this question, on all 5 vantage points, the two are very different. First, philosophically, Sri Aurobindo believes in the whole concept of the Vedantic concept of one consciousness. So it is not materialism at all. Matter itself
Right.
is actually a creation of condensed consciousness.
Oh,
So it's almost a reverse Big Bang. It is not the question of from matter emerging life and from life emerging mind. It is preceded by consciousness first getting into matter, and then the evolution would start. So evolution is preceded by involution, which is a completely different way of looking at the whole concept of how things have come about. So with regard to philosophy, the two are different. With regard to model of the mind, the two are completely different. Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind accepts much of what Tantra and Yoga has to say, and then adds to it in terms of his own evolutionary psychology, where the human being is seen as made of three layers: the physical, the emotional, which he calls the vital, the mental, and the supramental. So it's like the human psyche can be visualized, the model of the mind can be visualized. So there is a physical component of it, something to do with our genetics or the matter we are made of. Then we have the on the top of the physical, we have the vital. So we have this physical, then we have this vital. Right? So the physical would be downwards of Muladhara. All the chakras there would be by and large dealing with the physical. Then we have the vital. Vital would include the sex chakra, the power chakra, and the heart chakra. And also the throat chakra. And this again, it divides into the higher vital, the higher emotions, the central vital, and the lower vital, the lower emotions. So emotions can be both good and not good. So envy also is an affect, and compassion also is an affect.
Right.
So compassion would be falling under the higher vital, and envy will go into the lower vital. And then we have the mental. And very importantly, above the mental, there are ranges, that how we can map out the ranges above the mental up to the supramental. So he has ranges like from normal mind to higher mind to illumined mind to intuitive mind to over mind and then the super mind. So he has mapped out this whole thing, which is completely new for psychoanalysis. Because psychoanalysis, if we look at the human being and if we divide the mind into three parts, the abnormal, the normal, and the supernormal, psychoanalysis has never really dealt with the supernormal. So if it comes in contact, the most usual tendency is to explain it in terms of the abnormal.
Right.
And this is where the critics call it pathologizing everything. And psychoanalysis would respond by saying, you are taking a leap into a wish-fulfilling hallucination. It's nothing like the supernormal. It is you are on a trip of your own back into the magical days of the infantile years.
Right.
So this is a perpetual contest going on. And therefore, the model of the mind is completely different. The third is pathogenesis. Because Sri Aurobindo's view of the model of the mind opens up two more areas as reasons for psychological problems which are not in psychoanalysis. One is the karmic reason, that one can have a psychological problem out of karmic reasons. And second, out of uh, possession by some spiritual forces which are not benign. Some evil spiritual forces can take possession, and that can also be a reason either for beginning or continuation of a psychological problem. Now, these two are completely out of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis would not go into anything like the spirit and therefore there is no question of spiritual possession. Also, it would not
Right.
go into karma. Then we have the fourth point of healing. So Sri Aurobindo has a very unique method. He calls it a three-step method: aspiration, rejection, and surrender. So when faced with a psychological issue, first one must have an aspiration to get out of it. Second, one must reject it, that I don't want it. In normal sense, normal psychological language, we will say the first would be positive goal setting.
Yes.
The second would be making it ego dystonic, making the sickness ego dystonic. And third, she says, surrender to God with an intention that this should get healed. Now, this is a mystic's language. This is not the language of a scientist or a psychotherapist.
Right. Right.
Therefore, this healing method is different. The only comment that I would like to specifically make here is when Sri Aurobindo says rejection, it is very different from suppression and repression. It is neither of them. It is neither suppression nor repression. It is a conscious rejection. This is very different, and therefore people wrongly equate it at times to suppression or repression, which it is not. It is a very conscious rejection with a very strong conviction to overcome it and making it so ego dystonic that it becomes easy to develop insights for transformative healing.
Right.
Then comes the final part of the purpose of life. Now, psychoanalysis does not go on this point to anything beyond reality adaptation.
Yes.
So, the highest purpose psychoanalysis can think about is to be able to work and love. It's very conservative in its goal. That if you don't have symptoms, you are able to adapt to reality, you are able to work and love. That's all that psychoanalysis can at best go to. For Sri Aurobindo, the purpose is to establish the divine life on earth. And that starts with self-transformation. And therefore, the goals are very different. The first goal for Sri Aurobindo is to enter a state of no thought. It's a four-step goals. Sri Aurobindo's yoga has goals in 4 steps. The first step is to get into a state of no thought. Psychoanalysis would not even believe that such a state exists.
Right.
Second, to experience the psychic insight. The psychic is deep in the center of the heart. What in Indian mysticism is called the Jivatma, the soul that reincarnates. The second step also will be out of the window for psychoanalysis.
Yes.
The third is to experience oneness with existence above the head in the Sahasrara Chakra, or maybe even above that. That again is out of question for psychoanalysis. Is to bring down those above mind powers into everyday waking life for self-transformation. Now, these goals are too far-fetched for anything as conservative as psychoanalysis is.
Right. With this background, sir, how was he disposed towards psychoanalysis? And how is psychoanalysis again looking at him?
It was a relationship of mutual condemnation.
Okay.
Sri Aurobindo used to say that I don't take this psychoanalysis seriously. I find it difficult to take them seriously. And he said this specifically with Freud in mind.
Oh.
And we are talking of the early Freud, who is seeped into the Oedipus. So Sri Aurobindo used to say that you cannot find the secrets of the lotus by analyzing the mud where it grows. Similarly, he used to say the normal and the supernormal parts of the psyche cannot be understood by understanding them in terms of the abnormal. So the normal and the supernormal, like the lotus, may be growing in the mud of the abnormal. The ego and the superego and all the good things they can produce may be growing steeped into the id. And in the id, you may have a lot of mud, but that is not the whole story. You cannot analyze everything by analyzing the most difficult part of the id. So he used to say that the foundation is not in matter. The foundation is in the consciousness, spirit. So matter has come out of spirit. Spirit has not come out of matter. And this creates a very different view of looking at things.
Yes.
And for him, therefore, he used to say that the difficulty with psychoanalysis is this, that like any young science, it is rash and fumbling. It's like a young man who does not know what to do with his energies. The energy is too much, but the wisdom to channelize it and control it is not there. And therefore, he used to say that like any young science, this is rash and fumbling. And what it does is, it takes up the worst part of human nature and then tries to explain the whole of human nature in terms of those worst parts. So what Freud used to talk about, he used to call it the lower vital. So he used to say that what Freud is doing, the mistake that Freud is doing is this. He is taking up the worst part of the lower vital and explaining the whole of the psyche in those terms. That is the difficulty. On the other side, it is also not true that they would not admit that the phenomena pointed out by Klein and Freud don't exist. And this is a mistake that many people make in assessing relationship of Sri Aurobindo and mother with psychoanalysis. On one hand, it is true that they thought of psychoanalysis as a very restricted, very negative, and a very partial science, which was trying to explain the whole in terms of the small part of the whole, which was actually the worst part of the whole. And this was not, in their view, the correct way to do things. And Sri Aurobindo used to say that true psychology is awaiting its hour. That the real psychology, which will study the abnormal, normal, and supernormal parts as they should be studied, not explaining the supernormal in terms of the abnormal or vice versa. That true psychology is yet to start actually. And my feeling is some people in parapsychology and some people in studying psycho-spiritual interface areas are slowly beginning to study these things which Sri Aurobindo had hinted at. So they did have this negative comment to make on the limitations of psychoanalysis. But that does not mean they negated the whole of psychoanalysis. The two are different. What psychoanalysis found is one thing. What psychoanalysis did with what they found is completely different. So what psychoanalysis found was true. There was no question about it. They did explore and rightly found the lower vital of the human nature. So the bottom two chakras were rightly analyzed and discovered and gone into to whatever extent psychoanalysis did, and that was correct. So what they found was not wrong, but what they did with what they found, which is to extrapolate that onto the whole of human nature. That was the difficulty. So many disciples used to write letters to both of them, Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and they did mention about the Oedipus or the Kleinian aggressive phenomenon. And in one place, mother also writes in reply to the disciple, she says, there is no use denying these complexes. It is better to face them and get over them. So it was not that they denied what psychoanalysis found, but they were not ready to accord primacy to those findings in description of human nature. On the other hand, if you look from psychoanalytic point of view on Sri Aurobindo, psychoanalysis typically took that classical pathologizing path. So for psychoanalysis, he was a frustrated narcissist. And his early life loss of the mother and parents led him to this whole visualization of the eternal mother. And they would point out that if you read sorry, his chapter in Savitri called the splendor of the Divine Mother, it's almost like description of an all good breast. Similarly, they point out that this whole idea of creating perfection on this world is essentially a narcissistic idea. And third, it is inability to accept reality. And fourth, when he was in prison, they feel the trauma was so high that because of the trauma, he had a hallucinatory vision, which he calls spiritual. So in the prison, Sri Aurobindo had a very important spiritual vision where he saw the same reality that pervades everything. He uses a Sanskrit line to express that. It is, I think, from Gita, it says, Vasudevam idam sarvam. That something of, I'm not very fluent in Sanskrit, but something on those lines, which the meaning is this, that it's the same reality which pervades everything. And I could see it in experience, not just cognitively. And the psychoanalytic criticism is that it was a wish-fulfilling hallucination as a defense against unbearable trauma. And that, they say, goes on because after coming out of prison, he gave up all the political activities. He was so afraid. And he ran away to Pondicherry. So what believers would say was voice of God asking him to go to Pondicherry. They would say it is the voice of fear that he ran away. So both of them were in a sort of a mutual condemnation, and very unfortunately, because I think both of them have to come together because it will strengthen both of them. The overarching structure of Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind and the focused process knowledge of psychoanalysis. Both have to come together in some way for our better understanding of the mind. And this is what I have tried to do in my own model of the mind, which I call HEAT, where I try to put the two together, Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind and psychoanalysis.
From what you shared, something hopeful is emerging, that these two different perspectives which appeared very unmatchable or unbridgeable
Right.
in your heat model of the mind, which I think we shall take up later, It seems that there will be some matching or a gap will be bridged between the two. We shall talk about it later, I think.
Fine, fine.
Yeah. Uh, in retrospect, how do we look at his ideas and discoveries in general?
His ideas fall in many categories. First, let us say one of his ideas was unification of Europe, which was his thinking in the political sphere, which practically has now come true, almost come true. You have European Union now.
Uh,
His second idea was to have freedom for countries which were occupied by Britain, which also is a fact now. His third idea was that human beings would have to reinvent their politics, their culture, and everything else in the light of spiritual development, which is still far away for us. And it is something very interesting he said. I think it's worth mentioning. It's a $1 billion statement, I would say. He says, and I can't find a better expression of packing the world of wisdom into one statement. He says, the whole problem of human race, internally speaking, is to move from ego being the center to the psychic being the center. Because all the problems from inside, they come essentially only out of this difficulty. And I think I have not seen anyone express the root of human problems of the internal world and the relationship world. The scientific objective issues are different. If there is no rain, there is a drought, that's a different kind of a problem. If a meteorite comes on earth and strikes the earth, a different kind of a problem. If an earthquake happens, that's a different kind of a problem. Corona is a different kind of a problem. But the most common problem that we have is the problem of our intentions and our goodness. So almost 75% of world's problems can be solved if we can set right our intentions and our goodness. It's like saying today, if you put together all the factories of the world manufacturing food, we can actually feed 1200 billion people. But we are not even able to feed 700 billion people on this world because we run all our factories at 50 to 60% capacity because of economic reasons. So the whole problem is that 75% of human problems are of intention and goodness. And all of them essentially are centered around the same thing. The movement from human nature being centered on the ego to the psychic. Now, psychic is a term that he defines. It's not found in normal psychology. So unless we go into the depth of his own model of the mind, we cannot find out what psychic is and how to achieve it or how to realize it. Now, another idea that he puts forward is that we are not the last race, a better race is going to come. And we are a part of evolution, the difference being before man, evolution was completely automatic. It was driven by forces of nature, but with man, our conscious will has come into play. So evolution is no longer deterministic and biochemical. It is flexible because our free will is in play.
right.
And because our free will is in play, this evolutionary process can be accelerated or deaccelerated based upon what you and I do. So this is where the aligning of free will for this larger purpose is very essential to accelerate as much of evolution as possible. Now, these ideas still are in the future. and uh, there is a considerable group of people who don't believe in these ideas. So when we look at his ideas, some of his ideas already have come true. Some of his ideas appeal to a lot of people. Some of his ideas are opposed by people. But if we look at uh, movements in parapsychology, if we look at movements in positive psychology, in spirituality, I think on the whole, people are realizing across the spectrum that there is invaluable, priceless substance in what he has said.
Now we come to your new model of the mind, which you call the heat model of the mind. Uh, uh, like, in what sense is it based on Sri Aurobido's ideas or the his model of the mind?
Uh, I have taken that full model of Sri Aurobindo and added to it. One disclaimer and shortcoming of mine is this. Uh, some of the elements of Sri Aurobindo's model that I have used, I still myself don't understand them, especially the ideas of overmind and supermind, as well as ideas of the physical inconscient. Those are the ideas that I have not experientially experienced. So with those limitations, I have taken that model, believing someday I will be able to understand and make good of it. What I have done is brought psychoanalysis together with Sri Aurobindo and added concepts of my own which are completely novel. So if we look at Freud's model of the mind, Jung's model of the mind, both of them and Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, all the three are together. And on top of it, I have added concepts of yin and yang, which is a Chinese, not a Chinese concept, actually a Indian yogic concept, which unfortunately we, not unfortunately, but we call it yin and yang. Actually, it is Shiva and Shakti, really speaking. So I have put that concept. So we have Sri Aurobindo's model, we have the Shiva Shakti concept, we have Freud and Jung's model, and on top of it, I have described the psyche in terms of elementals and the epistemological process of the working of the mind. So this is how the heat model uses the East and the West together, and on top of it innovates certain things which are necessary to make that model dynamically functional and be able to describe uh, the manufacturing processes in the psyche. So this is how the heat model is there. So this is, I think, whenever we finalize a model of the mind, maybe in the next 25 years, it will not be very far from Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind. In my own study, I think it's one of the most comprehensive models of the mind I've ever seen. So my personal feeling is that whatever model we finalize in the next 25 years, I think almost 60 to 70% of that will still be Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind. One more element before we go forward, I forgot to mention one thing in Sri Aurobindo's ideas. One of the ideas of Sri Aurobindo was to create a community where the ideals that he wanted to practice could be practiced. A laboratory, like what he used to say, a camp of God is pitched in human times. So that camp has to be created. And I think Auroville was a very good experiment in that.
Yes, sir.
So people from all across the world came together and started living their lives in a community on a larger scale on the ideals of Sri Aurobindo and tried to create a divine life on earth to whatever extent they could. My feeling is,
Right.
regardless of to what extent they succeed or fail, whenever in future we try to design a culturally democratic world where we have multiple cultural formats coexisting in this world, and people can choose which cultural format they want to live in. When that cultural democracy becomes a fact of life, and I believe in very near future it should be a fact of life, it won't take that long. So maybe let us say next 20, 25 years, if this kind of cultural democracy becomes a fact of life in this world, in that democratic situation, my feeling is that Sri Aurobindo's uh, ideas or the type of society that he wanted will be a very important element of that whole setup. It will definitely be one of the main uh, models of collective living in that
Right.
culturally diverse setup where many models will coexist. My personal feeling is Sri Aurobindo's model and Osho's model and the family model, the three models at least will be there along with some other models which perhaps we are not able to envision at this point in time.
Uh, my last question is, sir, after listening to all this, how do you think, like, is the future will be like in influence? I mean, Sri Aurobindo's ideas will influence psychotherapy and self-development movements in future.
Psychotherapy will still take time. Self-development movement in terms of positive psychology and parapsychology will be the first to get influenced. I think they already are getting influenced. So we do see institutes coming up which are based upon Sri Aurobindo's work. And in the area of positive psychology and in the area of parapsychology particularly, the ideas of Sri Aurobindo are uh, easy to be found true or to be empirically tested or to go near to. So my feeling is that we should start seeing the application of Sri Aurobindo's ideas outside of his admirers,
Right.
first in the area of parapsychology and self-development area, and later on in psychotherapy. Psychotherapy still is too much in the grip of materialist, reductionist, and pessimistic view of the world. Secondly, uh, when it comes to quantum mechanics and consciousness studies, these areas are esoteric and they will take long before anything concrete comes out of them. But they also are experimenting to a great deal with Sri Aurobindo's ideas, at times knowing them to be his ideas, at times not knowing them to be his ideas. And lastly, I think uh, Savitri especially is one of those priceless treasures which the world is yet to find. I would not be surprised if a wave comes and suddenly this book becomes a kind of a blockbuster of a long time in a profound way, not in the way of a intellectual catwalk, but in a profound, settled way, what Akira Kurosawa would call the flow, which is the flow of the nobility and serenity of a big river. So that kind of a profound flow of this book, my feeling is that is one of the things that we are going to see uh, in coming times. For those who are in the political and cultural areas, some of his ideas related to India getting rejuvenated, beginning with the spiritual rejuvenation. That I think is slowly coming true. Of course, that path is not an easy path. It's a path of contest, contradiction, and violence. But in some way, through the obstacles, it is still coming true. How far Auroville succeeds or not, whether it becomes a proof of concept or it becomes a proof of failure, regardless of that, his ideas will always have interest, relevance, and if we believe in his believers and admirers, they may be what he said, may be not only a prophetic destiny, prophetic oracles, but even evolutionary destiny.
Uh, we have talked very extensively about Sri Aurobindo as a mystic and even as a spiritual master. In our upcoming new videos, we shall be talking about more such mystics and spiritual masters. Meanwhile, do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.